Russia never saw it coming. As Putin's forces prepared for yet another assault in the Sumy Oblast, something entered the skies above. Unseen and dangerous, what Ukraine sent was a marriage between Soviet steel and combined US and French technology. Nothing could prepare the wannabe invaders for what was to come. A deadly strike destroyed the Russian assault before it ever got started, and within was a subtle note of irony. The strike was conducted using a Soviet-era platform that Russia once treated as obsolete. Ukraine just showed that obsolescence is in the eye of the beholder. And when that beholder is Ukraine, what was old becomes new again, and what was once thought useless turns into a deadly demon in the skies. We head to the village of Regiment, or more accurately a few kilometers away from that Sumy-based village, where Russian commanders were hatching a plan. An assault would be launched on the village, one powerful enough to take the settlement, perhaps with the intention of using it to further Putin's aims in Sumy. This Ukrainian oblast means a lot to Russia. Located on the border between Ukraine and Russia, Sumy has long been desired by Putin as a place where he could create a buffer zone. Russia has been pushing for that zone recently, as an April 2026 UKR-Inform report reveals that the country's forces have been trying to seize border villages. In Russia's ideal world, a huge line of Russian forces would stretch from one end of the oblast to the other, ensuring that Ukraine can never again pull off anything like the humiliating counter-invasion of Kursk that happened in August 2024. And with that buffer in place, Russia would then be able to dedicate soldiers that it's sacrificing to the Sumy meat grinder to the east, where Russia is pushing to take Donetsk and finally the Donbass region. But the best-laid plans of Russians often go awry, and as Russian forces prepared for the Regiment assault, Ukraine had eyes on everything. Ukraine was watching as Russia moved. Assault troops, backed by strike drones and reconnaissance drones, were just behind the border in Tyotkino, which is part of the Kursk region. Ukraine saw it all happening in real time, perhaps aided by satellite imagery that is now coming through to Ukraine's forces almost as quickly as it's being created, shortening the country's kill chain by 90%. As Russian forces started to move, Ukraine got its own counter into place. The Sunflower Telegram channel, which reported on the strike that was to come, explains how. The enemy, with the support of UAVs, tried to move from Tyotkino towards Regiment. The TRO fighters timely detected and guided the aircraft to the place of accumulation of assault groups and UAV launchers, the channel says. Ukraine waited for the Russian invaders to group up and start their maneuver. Then Ukraine struck. But it didn't carry out its strike with the middle-range drones that had been ripping through Russian logistics and troop gatherings elsewhere in Ukraine. This time it was an airframe that has long been derided as obsolete that did the damage. A MiG-29 took to the skies. That alone might not have been a problem, but this particular Soviet-era aircraft had no intention of getting within range of the wannabe invaders. It stayed at standoff distance, and from there it unleashed a devastating marriage of US and French firepower to destroy the Russian soldiers. Ukraine's MiG-29 fired US-made GBU-39 small-diameter bombs and French-made AASM hammer bombs. Russia tried to intercept the aerial bombs. Militani reports that the invaders unleashed 4 air defense missiles at just one of the Western weapons. All of those missiles missed. Russia wishes they hadn't, and footage from the counterstrike shows us why. Shared by Sunflower, the 32-second video showcases the terrible force that Ukraine's Western weapons unleashed on the Russians who were attempting to advance. We see several massive explosions, sending plumes of smoke flying into the sky as the Russians who thought they were safe were taken out of commission. They didn't see any of this coming until Ukraine's bombs were almost upon them. And as for the intended assault on Regiment, it simply didn't happen. It couldn't. The Russian forces were too busy dealing with the aftermath of Ukraine's brilliant strike behind the lines. The village has survived to fight another day, and the buffer zone that Putin wants so badly in Sumy will have to wait, assuming it ever gets created at all. According to United 24 media, the target of Ukraine's combination of Soviet steel and Western firepower was the 1427th Motorized Rifle Regiment, which is known to operate along the northern border around Sumy. This regiment has a mixed history. Back in March 2025, it was involved in a Russian triumph, as soldiers from the regiment managed to enter the settlement of Vyrivnyuvach to raise the Russian flag. Putin would have loved that. Raising a flag is as good as a real victory for Russia's leader, as the images and videos can be used to feed the Russian propaganda campaign. This time it looks like the occupation was real. But what is also very real is the incompetence shown by this regiment ever since. Perhaps due to losing too many experienced operators, the 1427th had a humiliating moment just days before it attempted to invade Regiment. Having received orders to intensify strikes on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, soldiers from the 142th Regiment grabbed a Molniya II strike drone and took aim, and they hit a civilian vehicle in Glushkovo, in Kursk. Russia's 142th Regiment managed to punch itself in the face ahead of its attempt to assault Rzhivka. Ukraine's strike is the second humiliation for the group in less than a week. Salt, meet wound. Ukraine's MiG-29 just poured plenty of salt to eliminate all of the Russian slugs. The regiment has lost a key staging position, which couldn't have happened at a worse time for Russia. The front line at Rzhivka has been virtually unchanged since March, United 24 media reports. Russia intended to finally make some progress, but in a flash, all of those attempts were undone as Western firepower once again proved that it can ruin Russia in the rear. Let's talk about that firepower for a moment. What Ukraine unleashed on Russia was a combination of the GBU-39 and the AASM hammer. Both have long histories of use in Ukraine, and for good reason. They are devastating weapons. The GBU-39 is a guided munition that essentially allows for the delivery of 113-kilogram bombs to targets up to 74 kilometers away. They are somewhat similar to Russia's glide bombs, only far more advanced. The US Air Force says that a single GBU-39 system uses a smart carrier that can carry up to 4 bombs, which can be launched from both internal bays and external hardpoints. The bombs use GPS signals to navigate to their targets, and they can be launched in all weather conditions, day or night. Target coordinates are loaded into the GBU-39 before launch, either on the ground or in the air. The latter option allows pilots and their crews to react to new targets that appear during sorties. At $40,000 per unit, these bombs are cheap and powerful. And interestingly, Ukraine managed to launch them from MiG-29s. The AASM hammer is a similar weapon. Also a standoff munition, the hammer can also be fired in all weather conditions. It's also modular, which hints at what the AASM hammer really is. This weapon isn't a bomb. It's a kit that can be configured and attached to several types of dumb bombs, transforming them into precision-guided munitions. France has made versions of this bomb kit that can be attached to 125, 250, 500, and 1,000 kilogram bombs. Ukraine likely has kits for 250 kilogram bombs and perhaps 1,000 kilogram bombs, as these are the most popular. There is also a solid through line when it comes to stockpiles. France committed to deliver 50 to 60 of these bomb kits to Ukraine every month, and it's recently granted Ukraine a license to produce the kits itself. AASM hammer bombs have a range of a little over 70 kilometers, due in large part to a combination of winglets and a solid rocket motor built into the kits. They use a combination of GPS and an inertial navigation system, giving them a circular error probable of about 10 meters, Army recognition reports. These bombs hit hard, they hit fast, and they're used by several countries including France, India, Egypt, Croatia, Qatar, Morocco, and of course, Ukraine. Plus, like the GBU-39, AASM hammers are made for use in Western aircraft, including the F-16, Rafale and Mirage 2000D and F-1 fighter jets. But again, Ukraine launched them from a MiG-29. The answer lies in what the MiG-29 has been transformed into by Ukraine since the beginning of Putin's invasion. This Soviet-era fighter jet was treated as obsolete by Russia. It isn't. Ukraine proves it. But before we explain more, this is a reminder that you're watching the military show. This is the kind of insight you want to see. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel and have notifications enabled. We take you back to the start of Russia's invasion. About a month into the invasion, on March 27, 2022, Global Defense Corps asked a question that was on the minds of many at the time. Why hadn't Russia used its MiG-29s as part of the initial invading force? This certainly wasn't a case of Russia trying to hold back its more advanced aerial assets for later. Russia used Su-34s and Su-35s during the initial stages of the invasion, along with older airframes such as the Su-24 and 25. But the MiG-29 was completely absent. There was a certain logic to this move at the time. Ukraine maintained a relatively large MiG-29 fleet of its own, with 56 of the fighter jets left over from its time as part of the Soviet Union. Russia figured that sending like-for-like aircraft into the mix wasn't a good idea. And besides, the other fighters that Russia sent were supposedly better. The MiG-29 was considered outdated, even by Russian standards, which is crazy to think, given the amount of Soviet-era hardware the country has since employed against Ukraine. This disrespect toward its older fighter was also seen in a February 2009 investigation, which discovered that around 200 of the 291 MiG-29s that Russia has weren't fit to fly due to having fallen into disrepair. They simply existed to puff up the Russian Air Force's numbers, despite having no combat viability. This tells us everything we need to know about what Russia thinks of its own fighter jet. The MiG-29 isn't good enough for Ukraine. Broken, obsolete, not fit for purpose, and certainly not a patch on the air power that Russia has elsewhere. But as has been the case so often in this war, Ukraine has both proven Russia wrong and demonstrated that a nation that is capable of actual innovation, along with support from its allies, can turn what Russia believes to be an outdated aerial platform into a key asset. Ukraine understood the importance of its MiG-29s right from the beginning of the invasion. You could argue that it had no real choice before the arrival of Western airframes in the country, which didn't occur until a couple of years after Putin launched his invasion. But that argument doesn't hold water when stacked against a Military Watch magazine report from September 2025, which revealed that Ukraine has procured MiG-29 fighter jets from Azerbaijan, as the Caucasus state had retired them from service. Ukraine has also received MiG-29s from Poland and Slovakia during the war, which shows us something important. Ukraine sees value in these fighter jets where Russia doesn't. Part of this comes from the MiG-29's value as an air defense asset. As Militani points out, Ukraine has been using MiG-29s in air defense missions all over the country, likely because these aircraft can still take out drones and other projectiles. Outdated though the MiG-29 may be, it's more than fast enough to fly laps around even the best Shahid-type drones, and the air-to-air missiles that can be loaded into the jet can take those drones out in a flash of flame. However, that isn't how Ukraine used its MiG-29s just over the border from Sumy. What we saw in the crippling of the 1427th Motorized Rifle Regiment's attempt at an assault was the use of a MiG-29 as a standoff asset, capable of firing Western weapons. That's something that Russia never anticipated. It's also something that Russia can't pull off in return. The US and France aren't going to start delivering GBU-39s and AASM hammers to Russia. Those weapons are for Ukraine, and in yet another example of the combination of Ukraine's ingenuity and cooperation shining through, Ukraine and its Western partners have worked hard to transform the MiG-29 and other Soviet-era airframes into jets that Ukraine can use to damage Russia. MiG-29s being capable of launching Western weapons isn't anything new. Back in May 2024, Army Recognition was reporting that Ukraine had modified MiG-29 fighter jets so they could deliver Western munitions. They, along with Ukraine's stocks of Su-24s and Su-27s, have been adapted so they can launch certain munitions provided by the US, France, and the UK, the outlet reported at the time. AASM hammer bombs were mentioned by name, as were US-made JDAMs and British Paveway 4 smart bombs. Others have clearly followed in an operation that would have required the rewiring of each Soviet airframe's electronics to make the jets compatible with their new Western weapons. Ukraine continues this modernization of MiG-29s that were believed by Russia to be obsolete. In January 2026, Defense Express revealed that Ukrainian MiG-29s have also been adapted so they can unleash American ERAM missiles, meaning Ukraine will be able to operate its so-called outdated airframe until at least 2030. Granted, the attacks have to come from the standoff range, but that's more than fine for Ukraine. It just proved how effective the marriage of MiG-29 and Western weapons can be against Russia. So what does Russia have to deal with now because it underestimated its own fighter jet? Just MiG-29s that can unleash GBU-39s, AASM hammers and much more, which allow Ukraine to score hits against hardened targets dozens of kilometers away. No big deal, right? Well, maybe it is for an assault grouping in Tyotkino that has just been blown to smithereens by a fighter jet that their own military commanders told them was obsolete. Ukraine has transformed a Soviet-era relic into a legitimate and combat-proven modern weapon. And because Ukraine's MiG-29s have specifically been modified for use at standoff range, Russia can't even do anything about them unless Ukraine's pilots make the mistake of staying within range of Russia's air defenses. That isn't happening, at least not anymore. Ukraine has turned Russia's own glide bomb strategy against it using an obsolete platform that now has a new lease of life. But Russia will be hoping for something, even in the wake of this latest strike. Surely, at some point, Ukraine will have to run out of the Western weapons that its MiG-29 just used, right? That may be the case when it comes to the GBU-39s. The US hasn't committed any new military aid to Ukraine since March 31st, and it seems unlikely to change this approach. That doesn't mean that GBU-39s won't still head to Ukraine, but they'll have to be purchased by Ukraine or its partners via the Pearl initiative, rather than donated outright. The AASM hammer situation is different, as we mentioned earlier. Between 50 and 60 of them are flowing into Ukraine every month, and now Ukraine has a license to produce hammers itself. Soon, these dangerous bombs will be flying out of Ukrainian production lines or perhaps out of facilities in partner countries to keep those lines out of reach of Russian missiles. However, even if none of that was the case, and Ukraine did indeed have a finite stockpile of these Western weapons, Russia still wouldn't be safe from standoff strikes conducted by reinvigorated MiG-29s. Why? One word: Vyrivnyuvach. Maybe a little bit of a mouthful, but this one word dashed every hope that Russia had that Ukraine might somehow run out of the guided bombs that it used to wreck Russia's wannabe Regivka invaders, along with so many other targets. This word roughly translates to equalizer or leveler, which is a nod toward how Ukraine sees it. Vyrivnyuvach is a weapon, and not just any weapon. It's Ukraine's answer to Russia's guided bombs, and a weapon that Ukraine will be able to produce if its supply of Western guided bombs somehow runs out. Costing 3 times less than a US-made JDAM-ER, the Equalizer can be strapped to a 250-kilogram warhead, with preparation taking 30 minutes or less. Though created from scratch, this weapon serves the same need to strike Russian targets behind the lines using aircraft like the MiG-29. It's basically Ukraine's version of a glide bomb, though enhanced with modern guidance algorithms that improve accuracy and likely provide some resistance to electronic warfare. And stop us if you've heard this before about the GBU-39 and AASM hammer, but the Equalizer can be deployed day or night in any weather conditions. And Ukraine has been doing just that. On June 24th, United 24 media reported that the Equalizer had scored its first strike against a Russian frontline position. Ukraine has started small, but used its new guided bomb to attack a trench. The odds are that it's moved on to other targets, since using a weapon that we know for sure can be deployed from Su-24 fighter jets and will very likely be compatible with Ukraine's other Soviet-era and Western fighters. So no, Russia, there will be no relief from Ukraine's guided bombs. Whether they're Western weapons or bombs of Ukraine's own design, they will keep on coming. And just as we saw in the failed Regivka assault, the MiG-29s that Russia itself thought were obsolete will be a main delivery platform. A monster has been born, a melding of Soviet and Western muscle and metal. Russia has no answer, and it will be able to do nothing as this threat evolves even further in the time to come. As for Ukraine, it just keeps finding new ways to hurt Russia, and it did just that again earlier in July with an attack against Russian aircraft in Crimea that is unlike anything that we've seen before. This attack involved drones, a novel amphibious assault, and the use of combat divers. If you want to find out more, then we have the perfect video waiting for you to watch next. And if you enjoyed this video, we'd love to have you on board at the Military Show. Hit subscribe and enable notifications to ensure you never miss what we have coming next. And thank you as always for watching.